The hospital corridor was bathed in a gentle, dim light. The nighttime lamps, adjusted so as not to disturb the patients, created bright spots among elongated shadows. The only constant sound came from life support machines, heart monitors, and the subtle beep-beep marking heartbeats in different rooms. Occasionally, a nurse would walk by with quiet footsteps, carrying reports or reorganizing medications. The atmosphere was one of apprehensive serenity, typical of the early hours when everything seems to slow down, yet the tension surrounding each patient still lingers in the air. In the most critical rooms, such as the neonatal ICU, every second mattered. The breathing of newborns in incubators was closely observed, and any change on the monitors received immediate attention. Through the glass windows, one could see nurses checking tubes, clearing the baby's airways, ensuring everything was perfect for their recovery. It was a delicate and precise care, almost like a silent ballet, in which life was upheld by invisible threads of hope. Amid the near tranquility of the shift, tension hung over two specific wards. In one room, Mr. Logan, a man in his early 30s, had been in a coma for days, showing no sign of improvement. Nearby, little Ethan, his son, was fighting for his life in an incubator. There was a sense of sorrow enveloping them both, as if fate was cruelly testing their strength. Still, the hospital staff maintained a professional stance, trusting in medicine and any small miracle that might occur. Although everyone was used to dealing with ups and downs, something about that night felt different, as if something big was about to happen. In the last few hours, everything had been quite calm. The visitors had left respecting the hospital's visiting hours. The TVs in the rooms were muted or turned off. Only a few patients remained awake. Some stared at the ceiling in reflection. Others tried to distract their minds by reading or praying. Nurses exchanged information in hushed tones, avoiding waking those who had finally managed to get some rest. Everything followed an almost hypnotic pace, creating an artificial sense of tranquility. Generally, anyone passing through the corridor could feel the anticipation. Doctors rarely truly rest. They are always prepared for emergencies. That night, people were taking quick naps, trusting that nothing tragic would happen. However, fate does not usually give warning when it decides to turn everything upside down, and that was exactly how the first dramatic event of the early hours began. Suddenly, the automatic doors of the emergency room burst open violently, producing a metallic sound that echoed through the walls. Nurses and receptionists, who were busy with their tasks, were immediately startled. The icy dawn wind rushed in, scattering papers. For a brief moment, everything was chaotic and no one understood what was happening. Before anyone could react, an imposing figure appeared, a horse. Dark-coated with deep eyes and a proud appearance, it moved through the corridors with a determination that sharply contrasted the hospital environment. It did not neigh, nor did it run or seem out of control. It simply marched at a steady pace, as if it knew exactly where to go. People nearby could not believe their eyes. Someone even shouted, "A horse?" and ran to call security. Others stood still, jaws dropped, watching that majestic animal pass by. Some patients who were still conscious on gurneys tried to lift their heads to see better, uncertain whether it was real or a medication-induced hallucination. No one understood where it had come from. It was as if it had appeared out of nowhere, materializing in the parking lot and walking forward without any hesitation. Security guards arrived at the entrance but hesitated to approach the horse. It showed no aggressiveness, but it also did not deviate from its path. It looked straight ahead, ignoring the turmoil around it. Some staff members attempted to block its way, but the horse simply maneuvered around them with gentle yet firm movements. There was something about it that commanded respect, a kind of serene aura, though utterly incomprehensible. As it advanced through the corridors, the confusion grew. Some believed it was an escaped animal from a nearby farm, but how did it get there? Others, more superstitious, began murmuring about omens or divine signs, and there were those who, frightened, kept their distance, afraid it might be dangerous. However, the horse paid no attention to anyone. It just kept going. It did not take long for it to reach the ward housing the most critical patients. Doctors, surprised, dropped their charts or broke off conversations. Nurses stopped pushing gurneys. Someone pressed the emergency button, calling for more help. But the horse, still calm, continued on. Its hooves echoed on the floor, and that muffled sound seemed to hold the breath of everyone who witnessed the scene. It was as though the horse was being guided by an unknown force, by a call impossible to ignore. There was conviction in its eyes, a gaze that, although not human, conveyed purpose. Only when it entered the corridor leading to the neonatal ICU and intensive care rooms did the staff notice something even more peculiar. It clearly headed toward the ward where Logan and his son, Ethan, were. In the neonatal ICU, little Ethan was in critical condition. His condition, which had once inspired hope, had worsened significantly that day. He had been born premature, and every minute was a battle for his tiny lungs to develop. Intubated, covered in wires monitoring his heartbeat and oxygen levels, he could barely respond to stimuli. The doctors and nurses had tried everything they could, but the baby's frail state only continued to deteriorate. The father, Logan, lay in a coma in another area of the same hospital. A domestic accident had left him unconscious, and he had not opened his eyes since. It was as if a wall stood between his body and the world. Ethan's mother was not present. It was said she had left before the birth, disappearing for unknown reasons. Little was known about her, as the family history was incomplete in the records. The few remaining relatives who tried to keep track of everything had little information. They were in shock at the possibility of losing not just the baby, but also the father in such a short time. The medical team, led by Dr. Marcus, divided their time between Logan's coma ward and Ethan's ICU, trying as far as possible to offer some kind of comfort. Yet even with all the technology and medical knowledge available, everything seemed to be heading toward a tragic outcome. However, the horse, now identified by a small tag on its saddle as Shadow, entered that ward with an almost otherworldly calm. The nurses caring for Ethan were stunned to see the animal approach. At first, they exchanged panicked looks, having never seen a horse freely roaming inside. One of them, Emily, took a few steps back, but noticed something different in the way Shadow carried itself. There was a surprising gentleness in the horse's movements. It walked slowly, as if aware of how fragile that area was. It did not touch any of the gurneys or bump into any equipment. And strangely enough, when it stopped before the incubator where Ethan lay, its eyes seemed to fill with a kind of tenderness. It was impossible not to notice that there was something almost human in that exchange of glances. Across the corridor, in a room with glass windows, Logan lay motionless in his bed, surrounded by monitors. Many believed his condition was nearing irreversibility. However, at that moment, there was a slight twitch in one of his fingers, almost imperceptible, catching the attention of a nurse, who immediately checked his vital signs. Though very subtle, it could indicate that his body was attempting to respond. Shadow, in front of the incubator, tilted its neck, bringing its muzzle closer to the glass. For a few seconds, it stared at the baby intently. Anyone watching could swear that the horse somehow saw beyond the visible. Then, very slowly, it touched the glass with its muzzle, producing a delicate, almost inaudible sound. A faint vibration spread through the incubator. Emily, who was watching, felt a shiver run down her spine. At that exact moment, the monitors showing Ethan's vital signs displayed a slight improvement. His respiratory and heart rates, previously unstable, began to stabilize. His oxygen saturation level, which had been perilously low, rose somewhat. It was a discrete change, but significant enough to catch everyone's attention. Dr. Marcus, who rushed to the scene after being alerted by the team, saw the data on the monitor and frowned in disbelief. He approached the incubator, quickly checking the vital parameters. Indeed, Ethan's condition, though still critical, showed an unexpected positive reaction. Marcus, a man who always relied on science and logic, could not explain how a simple encounter with a horse could produce any significant change in the baby's condition. Emily, for her part, had tears in her eyes. She was not naive. She knew every patient, especially a newborn, has variations in their signals, which may improve or worsen suddenly. However, the timing of the events was too striking to dismiss. Shadow's gentle touch, followed by the change in Ethan's vital stats, felt like more than coincidence. It felt like a miraculous event. Those around them, nurses, security guards, and other doctors, watched in astonishment. The horse remained by the incubator, quiet, as if waiting for confirmation that the child would be okay. It never once appeared anxious or distressed. On the contrary, its demeanor conveyed absolute serenity. Even the security guards, who had initially considered using force to restrain it, stayed back, unwilling to interrupt a moment that felt almost sacred. Meanwhile, an assistant approached Dr. Marcus, whispering, "I don't know what's going on, but Logan's room also showed changes on the monitors." Marcus turned, surprised, and rushed to the patient's room. Before leaving the neonatal ICU, He cast one last incredulous look at the horse, which seemed to gaze back at him. Logan lay in bed pale, with tubes helping him breathe. His body had shown few responses since the accident that placed him in a coma. Nothing indicated any real improvement. The brain activity seen in his tests was so low that the doctors feared permanent damage. But something had changed. His heart rate was steadier than before, and a faint tremor in his eyelids was noted. "Doctor." Marcus entered the room, his heart racing, and immediately checked the reports on the computer next to the bed. He saw that the vital signs had shown positive changes in the past few hours, exactly matching the moment Ethan had reacted. The team caring for Logan, who had been pessimistic about any chance of hope, started examining the patient with renewed energy. They adjusted the respirator settings, checked his reflexes, tested his response to light stimuli. Although still very weak, Logan seemed to be fighting to come back, something that had not occurred for days. It was as if, very subtly, his body was struggling to return. Among the staff, whispers spread. Some wondered if it was just a coincidence that father and son showed simultaneous improvement. Others, more skeptical, believed these were involuntary movements, without real significance. But there were those who noticed a pattern, a bond that defied ordinary scientific explanation. The fact that everything had happened alongside the mysterious arrival of a horse gave the situation a near supernatural feel. Marcus, despite being an experienced physician, felt torn. Part of him wanted to believe it was merely a happy medical coincidence, or perhaps some psychological connection between father and son manifesting physiologically. Another part, however, could not ignore the chill he felt upon witnessing the simultaneous improvements. Deep down, he wondered if, in some way, the animal had awakened something dormant in both. Meanwhile, Shadow remained in the neonatal ICU, still standing by the incubator. The glow from the monitors reflected off its dark coat, creating an almost hypnotic contrast. The typical tension of that environment had shifted into a sort of reverent calm. Emily, who was caring for Ethan, could not resist her curiosity and gently touched the horse as if to express gratitude. To her surprise, it accepted her caress, flicking its ears in a contented response. In the midst of this peculiar atmosphere, some people tried to regain control of the situation. The hospital supervisor discussed with security the best way to remove the horse without causing stress to the patients. Yet each time they approached the animal, something in Shadow's eyes made them hesitate. It was as if it conveyed a silent message. "Don't do anything yet. I'm not finished here." And, without knowing why, most simply backed off, opting to wait a little longer. After about half an hour, Ethan's improvement began to consolidate. Dr. Marcus returned to the neonatal ICU, holding some emergency test results from Logan, and could not hide his astonishment. Although the baby was still in critical condition, his status was far more stable than at any previous point that night. The doctor moved closer, examining him carefully, measuring temperature and respiratory rate. Emily explained that the horse had remained quiet, barely moving, just watching the newborn. During that time, Ethan experienced peaks of improvement, as though something was encouraging him to breathe better and respond more. The machines showed oxygen levels much closer to normal for his age, an almost miraculous shift given his earlier situation. Once he finished examining the baby, Marcus turned to Shadow. His expression was a mix of gratitude and disbelief. He approached the horse's muzzle, not entirely sure how to do it. It was not common for a hospital to be invaded by such a large animal, and much less to associate it with a medical recovery. Still, he extended his hand, recognizing Shadow's contribution. The horse gently bobbed its head, accepting the timid contact. Meanwhile, in Logan's room, nurses reported that, for the first time since the coma began, the patient had moved his hand more noticeably. It was not a vigorous motion, but it could no longer be easily dismissed as an involuntary reflex. One nurse heard Logan emit a weak groan, something that had never happened before. It was a sign of struggle, of someone trying to emerge from darkness. News spread quickly. Soon, doctors and staff gathered around the room door, trying to understand what was happening. Under Marcus's supervision, they performed a series of checks, measuring pupillary reflexes, pain response, and reaction to voices. Logan was still on the edge between unconsciousness and awareness, but clearly his condition was changing. Occasionally, his eyelids quivered as though attempting to open. Among the team, discussions ensued. "This is incredible. Could it be because of the horse? There's no explanation, but I'm glad he's improving." A sense of hope pervaded the corridors. even affecting patients who overheard bits of the story. After all, witnessing a mysterious recovery in a place where life is so fragile can rekindle anyone's faith. While Logan made his first signs of waking, Marcus called his team together to talk about the situation. They gathered in a small meeting room near the ICU, speaking in hushed voices to avoid alarming others. The main topic was the simultaneous improvement of father and son, something that made little sense in usual medical logic. "I've never seen anything like this," Marcus confessed, looking at Ethan's chart. The baby was on the brink of respiratory failure. All of a sudden, he's showing signs of stabilizing, and it all started when that horse showed up. One of the nurses, Joanna, folded her arms and shook her head. "It's hard to believe a horse could have anything to do with this, but I can't deny that the timing is intriguing. Maybe it's a psychological effect even in a coma," suggested another doctor, Roberto, furrowing his brow. "Like father and son having some kind of bond we don't understand, and the horse's presence was mere coincidence." Emily, still moved by what she had witnessed, decided to speak up. "Whatever happened, coincidence or something else, I don't care. The important thing is that there was improvement. I can't explain it, but when the horse touched the incubator, it felt like it brought good energy. I felt it." Marcus stroked his beard, deep in thought. He was used to basing everything on studies and statistics, but he could not fully dismiss the idea that something beyond the physical was involved. "We can't jump to conclusions, but we also can't ignore what happened. What should we do about keeping the horse here?" There was a brief silence. Obviously, by hospital regulations, an animal that size could not roam freely, yet no one wanted to be the one to chase it out, especially given the positive developments. Emily spoke up. "I think we should let it stay a bit longer. We don't know if Ethan's improvement will last. What if, in some unexplainable way, he's important in this process? We could move him to the open courtyard at the back and keep an eye on him. That way we can control the situation without scaring him off." Marcus nodded in agreement. "All right, I'll speak with the hospital administration, but we need to be careful. We must ensure safety for the patients, for the horse itself, and for everyone here." Thus they decided that Shadow would stay temporarily in a fenced-off patio behind the building. Before making the transfer, however, they allowed him to remain a bit longer by Ethan's side, under constant supervision. This seemed to ease everyone's worry, as anyone could intervene if the horse became restless. Within a few hours, as dawn approached, the story had already spread through the hospital. Patients passed the word from room to room. "I heard a horse came in here and a baby almost miraculously started getting better." The skeptics laughed, calling it exaggeration or a baseless rumor, but those who had witnessed the scene confirmed every detail. For many, a new hope had awakened. The hospital was not large, but it handled multiple serious cases, and most people there lived on an emotional tightrope. The belief that something special had occurred that night brought relief, reminding everyone that miracles can appear in the darkest hours. Some, inspired by the story, said silent prayers. Others peered down the corridor, hoping to see Shadow reappear. In the ICU, Ethan remained stable, showing steady, slight improvements. He was still intubated and needed intensive care, but his condition was no longer considered so desperate. He responded better to medications and seemed to breathe more independently. Dr. Marcus, though trying to stay grounded, could not help a small smile at the examination results. It was as though an invisible hand was aiding him. Meanwhile, Logan continued having minor muscle spasms. His consciousness was still in question, but the monitors showed increased brain activity. Some thought that any moment now, he could open his eyes. Each visit by the medical team revealed a subtle shift in his reflexes. Sometimes his eyelids trembled as if trying to open. Among the staff, comments varied. "This is amazing. Could it be because of the horse? I can't explain it, but I'm happy he's improving." A sense of optimism spread through the corridors, touching even the patients who heard bits of it from afar. Indeed, witnessing a mysterious recovery in a place fraught with uncertainty can reignite faith in anyone. Emily, especially, seemed deeply affected by the events. She walked the hallways with a brightness in her eyes, hoping for the father and son to pull through. She spoke little with her colleagues, as she was discreet, but she could not hide the optimism growing in her heart. Amid the machines, the reports, and the medical forecasts, she felt that life holds surprises beyond what can be seen or measured. Following the decision to keep Shadow in the inner courtyard, some staff members looked after him. They gave him water, feed, and space to move about. To everyone's surprise, the horse showed neither nervousness nor restlessness. Despite being in a place so unnatural for its species, It seemed to accept the situation as if knowing its mission there was not yet complete. Dr. Marcus received administrative approval to keep him there temporarily. He explained, without many details, that there was an unusual circumstance tied to the recovery of a baby and his father. Though the hospital board found the story bizarre, they decided it would do no harm to keep him around for a few days, as long as there were no sanitary or safety risks. Curious patients peeked through the windows overlooking the courtyard, whispering about the miracle horse. Some asked to go nearer, but due to protocol, only the hospital team could feed him and check on his condition. Even so, Shadow became a kind of local legend, a beacon of hope amid the heavy daily concerns of a hospital environment. During morning rounds, Emily and other nurses noticed that whenever Logan or Ethan's condition grew more unstable, Shadow would become agitated, pacing in circles and letting out soft neighs, as if sensing their pain. In moments when both father and son were more stable, the horse would return to its calm state, grazing or watching the passing staff. Questions swirled in everyone's minds. Where exactly had this horse come from? Why choose that hospital and those two people? Could it be something mystical or simply an extraordinary coincidence? Everyone searched for rational answers, but there were no clear leads. The nameplate on the saddle gave no owner information, only the name Shadow. They tried contacting local farms and ranches, but no one reported a missing horse matching the description. Staff began seeing Shadow as an enigma. An older nurse, seasoned by life, sighed while watching him from afar and commented, "I see faith in his eyes." Some found that silly, others thought it made an odd kind of sense given the energy surrounding the animal. The truth was that day after day, as Logan and Ethan continued to improve, Shadow's silent presence remained, almost as a guardian standing watch. Several more days passed after Shadow's arrival. Ethan's once dire prognosis steadily got better. He still relied on machines to breathe, but his lungs now showed signs of maturing. His heart rate had stabilized to safer levels for a premature infant. The nursing staff set up rotating shifts to ensure nothing was overlooked, changing diapers, cleaning airways, administering medications, all in a precise rhythm. Emily, who had been close to the case from the start, felt a special bond with the baby. Whenever possible, she spoke softly to him, letting her gentle voice fill the air. She would say things like, "You can make it, little one. We're all rooting for you." Sometimes she noticed small reactions, like Ethan moving or blinking, but she knew most of it was natural reflex. Still, those tiny responses brought her joy. One morning, while checking oxygen parameters, she noticed they were impressively high and stable. She called Dr. Marcus, who, upon examining them, realized the baby might soon be able to breathe with less help from the ventilator. That was a monumental achievement. They agreed to begin, little by little, reducing the support. Typically, this is done in careful stages to avoid abrupt changes that could overwhelm the infant. Everything went well at first, but they hit a tense moment. As they tried to slightly lower the ventilator pressure, Ethan showed initial difficulty. His heart rate spiked and his oxygen saturation dropped, triggering alarms. The team immediately reverted to the previous settings. Dr. Marcus told them to remain calm, reminding everyone that this was part of the process and that patience was essential. Curiously, at that exact moment, Shadow, out in the courtyard, began neighing loudly, pawing the ground. Those near him noticed an unusual anxiety. It seemed as though he sensed something was happening with the baby. They managed to calm him, but the incident caught everyone's attention, reinforcing the belief there was some link between the horse and Ethan's condition. After reverting to the original settings, the baby's parameters returned to normal. Emily maintained close monitoring, ensuring he was comfortable. She again whispered reassuringly, "You're strong. You can get past this." As she watched the baby, she could not help thinking about the horse just a few steps away, somehow sharing each fluctuation in his condition. While Ethan struggled to breathe more independently, Logan, still comatose, underwent gradual improvement. His body's reactions were more evident. Sometimes he moved his lips as if trying to speak. On other occasions, his fingers trembled involuntarily. Nurses more than once observed slight head motions, signs that he might be trying to resurface to consciousness. Doctors considered reducing some sedative medications to see if that would help him wake. It was a delicate step, as they had to be sure his brain was recovering enough to handle it. After multiple discussions, they decided on a gradual protocol. They eased off certain drugs, keeping only those essential to prevent seizures or intense pain. In the first days of this change, Logan remained stable. Though he had not opened his eyes, his vital signs were a bit stronger. By then, many staff members joked that, like Ethan, Logan was lucky to have a silent guardian. Whether superstition or not, the improvements were undeniable, and no one felt inclined to question Shadow's presence or the possibility of a miracle. When almost a week had passed since Shadow's arrival, the unexpected happened. Logan moved his lips more clearly and produced a muffled sound. The nurse beside him nearly dropped her clipboard in surprise. She called the doctors, who hurried in. This simple utterance felt like a major triumph after so many days of utter silence. They tried talking to him, calling him by name, asking him to squeeze their hand if he could hear. As Logan struggled to produce a sound, discreet tears rolled from the corners of his closed eyes. It was an emotional sign. Perhaps he was starting to grasp his own situation, even though in a confused state. Nurse Joanna gently wiped away his tears, whispering, "It's all right, you're going to be okay, we're here to help." And in a strange synchronicity, Shadow lifted its head in the courtyard, staring toward Logan's room. Those outside said the horse stood there for a moment, looking intently at the window, unmoving, as if it knew something important was happening within. Another day passed, and on the following morning, an even greater miracle occurred. Logan opened his eyes. He did so slowly, blinking several times, overwhelmed by the light in the room, turning his head from side to side in confusion. Nurse Emily, who was on duty, quickly called Dr. Marcus. He came right over, speaking calmly. "Logan, if you can understand me, blink twice." Logan hesitated for a moment, then blinked, as requested. That was enough to confirm he had regained some level of consciousness. The staff was overjoyed, though they maintained professionalism and carried out all the protocols needed to assess the extent of his improvement. Logan tried to speak, but at first all that emerged was a faint whisper. Even so, it was clear he wanted to communicate. Gradually, as he worked on breathing exercises, he managed to utter a few disjointed words. Dr. Marcus and Emily, hearts pounding, encouraged him. "It's all right, take it slow. You've been a long time without speaking." He seemed upset, possibly attempting to recall something critical. Maybe he was confused about how much time had passed or worried about his son. Then they gently told him about Ethan's situation. They explained that his son was born prematurely and was in the neonatal ICU but was showing significant signs of improvement. Logan's face tightened, tears filling his eyes. He could not say much, but his gaze combined sorrow over the child's precarious condition with relief at the hope of his survival. Outside, Shadow let out a neigh as if in response to that wave of emotion. Even the most skeptical among them felt a chill. It seemed that, sensing the father and son's reconnection, the horse was expressing its joy. With a still hoarse voice, Logan finally managed a clearer sentence. "Ethan, I need to see him." He spoke between coughs and pauses to catch his breath. The team looked at one another, surprised at how quickly he was recovering his ability to speak. Typically, coma survivors take a while to regain speech. Despite Logan's plea, hospital protocols and their fragile conditions required caution. It was not certain he was strong enough to leave his bed and go to the neonatal ICU, nor whether Ethan could tolerate extended visits. Nonetheless, they agreed that if Logan's condition remained stable for a few more hours, they would arrange a way to bring him in a wheelchair to see his son. That possibility touched Logan deeply. Whenever he tried to speak, he mentioned Ethan's name or gestured to inquire about him. Nurse Emily, who followed both cases closely, reassured him, "He's responding well. We just need a little more time and care." Meanwhile, Ethan underwent another round of tests, confirming his progress. He was breathing somewhat better on his own, although still reliant on medical devices. The team concluded that if all went well, they could allow a short visit from Logan, adhering strictly to hygiene and isolation measures required in a neonatal ICU. Finally, one late afternoon, they arranged everything so Logan could see the baby. He was carefully transferred to a wheelchair, still wearing an oxygen tube to help him breathe, given he was not fully recovered. Dr. Marcus and Emily went with him, ensuring all remained under control. When he entered the neonatal ICU, Logan was visibly emotional. Upon seeing the transparent incubator with that tiny being surrounded by wires and tubes, tears slid down his face. He extended his hand tentatively to the extent he could, gently touching the incubator where Ethan rested. It was a moment of pure sentiment, with no words to describe it. Ethan, his eyes partly closed, seemed to react to his father's touch on the glass. The monitors showed a slight increase in heart rate, but not a dangerous one. It was as if he recognized that paternal presence. Logan whispered, "Son, I'm here," his weakened voice trembling with love. The health professionals watching were also moved. Some, like Emily, discreetly wiped tears. Working in a hospital can often harden you to suffering, but there are moments that break through any defenses. Seeing a father who had recently lain in a coma, now struggling to connect with his fragile baby, was something that brought tears to even the most experienced among them. Outside, Shadow seemed restless. Some reported that at the very moment Logan touched the incubator, the horse stared toward the door connecting the courtyard to the corridors, as though sensing the reunion. A few staff members saw it as coincidence, while others staunchly believed there was a deeper connection, transcending common understanding. As Logan remained a few more minutes with Ethan, the baby's monitors indicated a lessening of stress levels when hearing his father's voice. Marcus pointed out that even in critical states, newborns can sense a parent's presence through tone of voice and the energy conveyed. This was the embodiment of the family bond, now reinforced by a seemingly mystical element, Shadow's sudden appearance. At one point, still emotional, Logan said, I dreamed of a horse running free, and now it all makes sense." Emily and Marcus exchanged curious glances, wondering if Logan, even while in a coma, had perceived something about Shadow. He could not detail the dream fully, as his memory was fragmented, but made it clear that something within him had connected to the horse's presence. A little later, they had to end the visit, to let Logan conserve his energy and protect Ethan from undue stress. They wheeled Logan back to his room, and as Dr. Marcus left the neonatal ICU, he encountered a peculiar sight. Shadow standing near the fence separating the courtyard from the corridor, looking in through the glass. It seemed to be waiting for confirmation that everything was all right. Marcus stopped for a second, took a deep breath and smiled, nodding in acknowledgement. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. Things were indeed on the right track. Night fell, and Marcus, Emily, and a few colleagues gathered in the staff break room, exhausted yet relieved. They had worked long hours and needed to share their impressions of what they had witnessed. The main topic was obviously the remarkable improvement of both father and son, and how Shadow fit into all of it. Marcus started, sipping his coffee. "I don't usually believe in supernatural forces, but I can't ignore what's happening. Maybe there's a scientific explanation we don't yet know for these connections." Emily, fiddling with her ID badge, spoke softly. "All I know is that ever since Shadow came, everything changed for the better. It might be a coincidence, but my heart says otherwise." Roberto, another physician, chimed in. "There are studies showing that animals can have therapeutic effects, including horses in equine therapy for people with disabilities. But I'm not aware of any reported influence on a premature newborn or a comatose patient. Still, we can't deny the facts. We have positive results." Silence followed for a few seconds, each person lost in thought. Joanna, the veteran nurse, added, "Miracles happen where you least expect them. Sometimes science can't provide all the answers. I see in Logan's smile and Ethan's struggle the proof that love and faith matter as much as any medication." Marcus agreed, feeling a stir of emotion. "We'll keep monitoring closely. All we know is that if they continue improving, soon both will be out of danger. Then we'll have to decide what to do about Shadow. We can't keep him here forever, but we also can't just turn him out onto the street." In the days that followed, the victories became more tangible. Ethan was able, for the first time, to breathe on his own for a few minutes without the ventilator. It was a short test, but it confirmed his developing strength. The team cheered each milestone he reached. Slowly they began stretching the intervals, always with caution. Regression was possible, but thus far, Ethan held strong. Logan, too, made progress in regaining movement and speech. Intensive physical therapy began to help rebuild atrophied muscles. Though still weak, his progress was evident. Each step, however shaky, made his heart beat more confidently. The dream of holding his son in his arms now seemed realistic, not just a distant illusion. During one of these therapy sessions, while walking the corridors supported by the nurses, Logan caught his first glimpse of Shadow in the courtyard. He stopped, leaning on the railing, gazing at the animal that had, in a sense, invaded his destiny. His eyes lit up. He raised his hand in a small wave. Shadow regarded him quietly, ears perked, letting out a soft neigh. There was a mutual recognition, an understanding that needed no words. Logan, moved, murmured, "Thank you." Perhaps the horse did not understand his words, but it felt his emotion. The nurse assisting him smiled, also touched by the scene. The morning breeze brushed their faces, and for a moment time seemed to slow, allowing that connection to take center stage. Shadow's fame, along with accounts of improbable healing, spread beyond the hospital. Local newspapers heard rumors and came seeking interviews. The hospital's administration, however, chose to remain discreet, banning unauthorized filming to protect patient privacy and well-being. Some reporters tried to force their way in, but were turned back by security. There was concern that too much publicity might stress Logan, Ethan, and even the horse. Still, word got around quickly. People whispered that the horse was a guardian angel, or the reincarnation of a protective spirit. Others speculated it was merely a trained therapy horse that had escaped and happened upon the hospital by chance. Whatever the theory, the hospital's atmosphere was changed. Everyone seemed more hopeful. The teams worked with lighter hearts, and even the patients felt a new sense of positivity. At one point, Marcus, who rarely spoke of personal beliefs, admitted to Emily, "I've always relied on science as the only truth, but now I'm facing something I can't explain in usual scientific terms. It's confusing, but also incredibly comforting to see Logan recovering and Ethan getting stronger every day." Emily only smiled, understanding his sentiment. Sometimes we just have to accept that some mysteries go beyond our understanding. Shortly after, Ethan achieved what they had been longing for, breathing on his own for more than 12 consecutive hours, with the ventilator only assisting in critical moments. For a premature baby in such dire straits, it was an astounding turnaround. The staff celebrated discreetly with smiles and quick embraces. This milestone prompted Dr. Marcus to allow a more direct father-son encounter with fewer barriers. Thus, on a sunny afternoon, arrangements were made for Logan to hold Ethan in his arms for the first time. Still in the ICU, following strict hygiene rules, they had to wear special garments, thoroughly wash arms and hands, and wear masks. Still, it would be a more intimate meeting. When they finally placed the baby in his trembling arms, Logan could not hold back his tears. He nearly lost his breath from sheer emotion, and the nurses had to remind him to breathe calmly. Ethan was so tiny he hardly filled the space of his father's arms, yet his tiny face expressed a sweet serenity, as though recognizing that place as safe. Logan leaned in, feeling the baby's warmth. He whispered, "I'm here, my warrior. Hold on, please." The staff watching felt their hearts overflow. There was no sound but the soft beeping of machines. The room seemed enveloped by a loving energy. No one dared interrupt. The countless hours of suffering and uncertainty all seemed to fade in that exchange of warmth. Emily felt she was witnessing the kind of scene that justifies so many sleepless nights and exhausting shifts. Meanwhile, Shadow continued in its corner of the courtyard, receiving necessary care. Anyone who passed by noticed he was calmer than ever. It was as if, sensing Logan and Ethan were achieving real progress, he could finally relax. Sometimes he would lie down on the grass, resting peacefully. Time went on. After more days, both father and son's conditions improved to the point that the hospital considered moving Logan to a standard room and soon transferring Ethan to a less critical neonatal unit. Plans were made for the future, discussions of at-home care and ongoing physical therapy. The once looming fear that they might die gave way to cautious optimism. With this progress, the hospital administration began to ask, is it time to find a permanent place for Shadow? He still had no official owner, and searches for his origin led nowhere. While staff weighed various options, Logan, now walking with assistance, asked to join the discussion. He wanted to be responsible for the horse in some way, to repay what he believed was a rescue. But his financial situation remained unclear, as he had been hospitalized for so long. During these talks, a curious event occurred one night. Shadow began neighing restlessly, pawing at the ground in agitation. Security checked and found the gate latch to the courtyard was open. It appeared to be an oversight, but some believed the horse could have just walked out. Yet Shadow remained, not crossing the boundary. It was as if he wanted to alert them to the danger, but had no desire to leave. This loyalty impressed everyone. The horse could have left any time, yet he chose to stay. Eventually, the day arrived when Logan, now partially discharged, could walk without major support. He moved slowly but unassisted to the neonatal ICU to see Ethan, and he also got permission to visit other areas if he followed medical advice. On one such walk, determined, he headed to the courtyard where Shadow stayed. He wanted to approach the horse for the first time without a wheelchair. Stepping into the courtyard, he felt the sun on his face. His heart quickened. He worried how the horse would react to him up close. After all, they had never been alone together. Shadow noticed his approach. rose, and looked at him. For a moment, they stood quietly, exchanging looks. Logan, feeling emotion rise in his throat, extended his hand. "Hey, I just want to thank you." Shadow approached slowly, sniffing his hand. When the horse gently touched his fingers with its muzzle, Logan felt warmth in his chest, an overwhelming sense of gratitude and renewed life. He lowered his head, murmuring, "Thank you for watching over Ethan and me. I don't know if this makes any sense, but I feel you saved us." To an outsider, it might have seemed like a simple interaction between a man and a horse, but anyone who knew the story understood it was a moment of deep acknowledgement. Shortly after, Emily appeared with a gentle smile, announcing Ethan was also doing very well. Apparently, the baby was on the verge of being weaned off the ventilator completely. Logan hugged Emily, overcome by joy. Then he stroked Shadow's head once more, and the horse responded with a soft snort, its eyes half closed in contentment. The following days passed in a quiet celebration. In a hospital, open rejoicing is subdued because there are always other severe cases, grief and pain. But on that corridor where everything had begun, a sense of relief prevailed. The tranquility of that first night had been broken by Shadow's arrival, yet it now felt like the same animal had brought a renewed sense of peace. No one ever discovered exactly where the horse came from. There were no missing animal reports that matched his description. No ranch claimed him. Local authorities investigated and hit a dead end. The story took on the flavor of an urban legend, but for those who lived through it firsthand, it remained undeniably real. Marcus, still the man of science, wrote a detailed medical report on the father's and son's recovery. Of course, he made no direct mention of mystical energies or miracles, but he noted an unknown external factor coinciding with their improvements. Meanwhile, Emily recorded pages in her personal diary, describing how the experience transformed her faith in the unseen. Finally, Ethan reached a long-awaited milestone. He could breathe independently, with no machinery. This triumph was quietly celebrated by the team with applause, smiles, and a few tearful hugs. Dr. Marcus allowed one more father-son visit, now with fewer constraints. They even contemplated letting Logan briefly take Ethan, still with caution, out of the ICU to see Shadow, as a symbolic gesture of the bond formed by this ordeal. That visit took place on a bright, sunny afternoon. Logan, holding Ethan, carefully wrapped for protection, walked toward Shadow. Everyone watched, hearts full, as the horse lifted its head and gently touched the baby's tiny foot with its muzzle. Ethan, in all his newborn innocence, seemed calm, breathing well, though still so small and fragile. It was a moment of pure poetry. Marcus, Emily, and other staff gathered around, many with misty eyes. Logan smiled, a smile that seemed to mend all wounds. He had been saved from death, and now he held his son in his arms, a son who had almost departed before fully entering the world. Words could not describe all he felt. It was a second chance, and certainly Shadow was part of it. For those who followed the entire ordeal, the story became living proof that love, faith, and what we call the unexplainable can come together to work wonders. Shadow, the horse with the deep gaze, had left his mark on everyone at that hospital. Perhaps his appearance would never be rationally explained, but his impact was undeniable. One need only look at Logan and Ethan, together and safe, to understand that sometimes life writes scripts beyond human comprehension. Now you, the viewer of this story, are invited to reflect. Which part of this narrative touched your heart the most? Was it Shadow's sudden arrival, defying all that's considered normal? The bond between father and son, both fighting for their lives? Or the way a simple touch from a horse seemed to spark a miracle? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments. If this story of love and overcoming obstacles resonated with you, please share it with friends and family. And if you want to follow more stories that remind us of the power of faith, courage, and invisible ties that connect us, be sure to subscribe to our channel. In every new tale, we strive to convey messages that touch the soul and rekindle hope. Life can be full of surprises and at times pain, but there is always room for light, whether in the form of a horse that appears in the dead of night or the smile of someone who wakes to a second chance at life. Never underestimate the power of unexpected encounters and the faith that embraces the impossible. May you feel inspired to believe that even when all seems lost, a breath of hope can arrive to change destiny.